The desert wind carried whispers of danger across the Arizona territory as twilight painted the sky in shades of amber and crimson. Ayana, a member of the Chiricahua Apache, had made his camp in a secluded canyon, far from the settlements where tensions between his people and the encroaching settlers ran as hot as the desert sun. His weathered hands worked methodically, securing his simple shelter against the rocks. At 28, Ayana had learned the value of solitude. The scars on his arms told stories of conflicts he wished to forget, and his exile from his own band was a wound that time had yet to heal. As darkness claimed the desert, Ayana settled into his bedroll, the familiar sounds of the night embracing him. The distant call of a coyote, the rustle of sagebrush in the wind, the crackling of dying embers from his small fire. Then came the sound that didn't belong, a soft displacement of fabric, the almost imperceptible shift of weight against the tent wall. Ayana's trained senses immediately detected the presence, but years of survival had taught him patience. His breathing remained steady, his body still, as someone, small, judging by the careful movements, slipped into his shelter. Through barely open eyes, he caught a glimpse of pale skin and tangled blonde hair. A young woman, her dress torn and stained with dust and what looked like dried blood. She pressed herself against the far wall of the tent, her whole body trembling like a leaf in a storm. Ayana had every reason to alert the camp, to drive out this intruder who could bring soldiers to his doorstep. Instead, something in her desperate silence stayed his hand. He had seen that kind of fear before, the terror of someone who had nowhere left to run. So he waited, maintaining the rhythm of sleep, while she cowered in the darkness beside him. Hours passed. The woman's breathing gradually slowed from panicked gasps to shallow, exhausted breaths. Still, Ayana didn't move. In his culture, patience was not just a virtue, it was survival. And something told him this girl needed time more than she needed words. The desert grew cold, as it always did after sunset. He could hear her teeth chattering, could sense her fighting to stay quiet despite her obvious distress. When she finally fell into an exhausted sleep, curled in the corner of his tent like a wounded animal, Ayana allowed himself to truly study her. She was young, perhaps 19 or 20, with skin that spoke of a life lived mostly indoors until recently. Her hands were soft, but marked with fresh cuts and calluses. Her clothes, though dirty and torn, had once been of good quality. This was no frontier woman accustomed to hardship. As dawn approached, Ayana made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Instead of waking her or slipping away, he chose to continue his vigil, waiting for her to find her voice. The second night arrived with a coolness that seemed to seep into every corner of the desert. Ayana had spent the day hunting and gathering supplies, always keeping his camp within sight. The woman, his uninvited guest, had remained hidden in his tent, emerging only when she thought he was gone to drink from his water supply. He had left food where she could find it, dried meat, wild berries, and bread he had traded for at a distant settlement. Each time he returned, the offerings were gone, replaced by the continued presence of someone too frightened to show herself. As darkness fell again, Ayana settled into his bedroll with the same careful routine. This time, however, he sensed a change in his silent companion. Her breathing was less panicked, though still guarded. The desperate edge of her fear had dulled into wary exhaustion. "I know you're awake." The words came so softly that Ayana almost convinced himself he had imagined them. But there they were, floating in the darkness between them, the first break in their strange, silent understanding. He didn't respond immediately. Years of living between two worlds had taught him that words, once spoken, could never be taken back. Instead, he continued his steady breathing, giving her time to find more courage. I saw you leave food for me." Her voice carried the refined accent of education, but it trembled with emotion. "You could have turned me in. Soldiers came by yesterday asking questions. I heard them talking to you." This was true. A cavalry patrol had indeed questioned him about runaway criminals and missing persons. Ayana had answered truthfully. He had seen no one matching their descriptions. The blonde woman hiding in his tent bore little resemblance to the well-dressed banker's daughter they sought. "Why?" she whispered. "Why didn't you tell them about me?" The question hung in the air like smoke from his evening fire. Ayana considered his response carefully. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured, carrying the slight accent that marked him as one who had learned English as a second language. "Because," he said quietly, "you reminded me of a scared rabbit I once found caught in a trap. Sometimes the kindest thing is to be still until the animal realizes you mean no harm." He heard her sharp intake of breath, followed by what sounded like a stifled sob. "I'm not an animal," she said, but there was no anger in it, only exhaustion. "No," Ayana agreed. "You are a person who is very far from home and very afraid. That much I can see without knowing your story." Another long silence stretched between them. Outside, the desert wind picked up, causing the tent fabric to flutter softly. The sound seemed to give her courage. "My name is Sarah," she said finally. "Sarah McKenna." "Ayana," he replied. "And this tent, small as it is, seems to belong to both of us now." For the first time since she had arrived, he heard something that might have been the beginning of a laugh, fragile and uncertain, but real. "I suppose it does," Sarah whispered back. As the night deepened around them, both strangers found an unexpected peace in their shared solitude. Neither knew that by morning their careful balance would be tested by forces beyond their control. The third day brought clouds that promised rain but delivered only oppressive heat. Sarah had finally emerged from the tent that morning, moving like someone testing the safety of thin ice. She was even younger than Ayana had guessed, with green eyes that held depths of pain far beyond her years. They ate their meager breakfast in careful silence, each stealing glances at the other. In daylight, their differences seemed more pronounced. Her pale skin already reddening, despite her attempts to stay in the shade, his bronze features weathered by years under the desert sun. Yet something had shifted between them in the darkness of shared words. "The soldiers," Sarah said finally, breaking their unspoken agreement to avoid difficult topics. "They're looking for someone who robbed the Tucson Bank and Trust. They think it was me." Ayana continued chewing his dried meat, giving no indication of surprise or judgment. "Did you?" he asked simply. "No." The word came out fierce and immediate. "But I was there when it happened. I saw everything." She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them like armor. "My father owns that bank, or owned it. I don't know what's left now. I was there doing bookkeeping when 3 men came in with guns. They knew exactly where everything was. Knew the combination to the safe, knew my father's schedule." Ayana set down his food and gave her his full attention. In his culture, when someone chose to share their pain, it was a sacred trust. "One of them was wearing a deputy's badge," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I recognized him, Deputy Walsh. He'd been courting me for months, coming to Sunday dinners, talking about marriage." Her laugh was bitter. "All the time, he was planning to rob us blind." "What happened?" Ayana's question was gentle, carrying no pressure. "They killed the teller, Mr. Jameson. Shot him when he tried to ring the alarm bell. When they saw me hiding behind the counter, Walsh said I couldn't be left as a witness." Sarah's voice cracked. "But one of the others, he said killing a banker's daughter would bring too much heat. They argued, and in the confusion I ran. The pieces began fitting together for Ayana. A banker's daughter on the run, presumed guilty of her father's own robbery. It was a story that fit too well with what he knew of frontier justice, quick to judge, slow to investigate. "I've been running for 5 days, Sarah said. "Sleeping in abandoned buildings, stealing food when I could find it. Everyone thinks I'm guilty because I disappeared. But if I go back," she shuddered, "Walsh will make sure I never testify against him." Ayana was quiet for a long moment, processing her story against his own experiences with injustice. Finally, he spoke. "I know something about being judged for things you did not do," he said. "My own people cast me out because they believed I collaborated with soldiers. I was trying to negotiate peace for my village, but when that peace failed, I became the scapegoat for everyone's anger." Sarah looked up at him with new understanding. "That's why you're alone out here." "That is why I understand what it means to run," Ayana confirmed, "and why I know that sometimes the only justice is the kind you make for yourself." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of approaching horses cut through the desert air. Both froze, listening to the steady clip-clop of what sounded like a patrol. "Sarah McKenna!" a voice called out, carrying clearly across the canyon. "We know you're out here somewhere. Come out peacefully, and you'll get a fair trial." Sarah went white as bone. "That's Walsh," she whispered. "He's found me." Ayana moved swiftly but silently, dismantling their camp with practiced efficiency. "Not if we leave first," he said. "Can you ride?" "Yes, but then we go deeper into the desert, where their horses cannot follow." He paused, meeting her eyes directly. "Unless you would rather face their justice than trust mine." Sarah looked toward the sound of the approaching voices, then back at this Apache man who had shown her more kindness than her own people. Her decision took less than a heartbeat. "I trust you," she said. The desert dawn of their fourth day together broke with the clear, sharp light that only comes after a storm. They had ridden through the night, following ancient paths that existed more in Ayana's memory than on any map. Now, hidden in a box canyon his grandfather had once shown him, they watched the sun paint the rock walls in shades of gold and red. Sarah sat beside their small, smokeless fire, her posture straighter than it had been since she first stumbled into his tent. The desperate fear that had marked her every movement was still there, but it no longer controlled her. "They'll give up the search soon," Ayana said, checking the condition of their horses. "Too far from their supply lines, and the desert is not kind to those who don't know its ways." "And then what?" Sarah asked. "I can't hide in the desert forever, and I can't go back to Tucson while Walsh is still free." Ayana had been thinking about this problem through the long night's ride. "There is a territorial marshal in Phoenix, a man named Coleman. He has a reputation for honesty, rare enough to be noteworthy. If we can reach him with your story—" "You said we," Sarah observed quietly. "I did." Ayana met her gaze across the fire. "You have given me something I had forgotten existed." "What's that?" "Purpose," he said simply. "For 2 years, I have been surviving. Now I remember what it feels like to live for something beyond mere existence." Sarah was quiet for a moment, absorbing the weight of his words. "I don't even know if my father is alive," she said finally. "The bank might be gone, everything we built destroyed. I might have nothing to go back to." "Then you will build something new," Ayana replied with certainty. "That is what people do when the old world fails them. They create a better one." "Together?" The question carried more hope than she had allowed herself to feel in days. "If you will have the partnership of an exiled Apache who talks too much," Ayana said, and this time his rare smile reached his eyes. Sarah laughed, a real laugh, bright and surprised. "I think I'd like that very much." And boom, as they prepared to leave their hidden canyon and begin the long journey to Phoenix, both understood that they were not the same people who had shared that first silent night in a stranger's tent. Sarah had found courage she never knew she possessed, and Ayana had rediscovered his place in a world that had seemed determined to reject him. The desert stretched before them, vast and challenging, but no longer empty. They would face whatever came together, the banker's daughter and the Apache outcast, bound by trust forged in silence and sealed with words spoken in darkness. Behind them, Deputy Walsh and his men had indeed turned back, their horses and their resolve both broken by the unforgiving landscape. Ahead lay Phoenix justice, and the possibility of a future neither had dared imagine. But in that moment, as they rode side by side toward the rising sun, the future mattered less than the present. Two souls who had found in each other the rarest treasure the frontier had to offer, someone worth trusting with tomorrow. The desert wind carried their hopes forward, and for the first time since Sarah had hidden in that tent, neither of them was running from something. They were running toward it.